Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are privileged today to have Dr. Sigrid Wolf with us, and he comes to us from the South Asia Institute, where he is a lecturer for international relations and comparative politics. He is also the director of research at the South Asian Democratic Forum, which is a Brussels-based think tank. Now, Siegfried is going to talk to us about a topic that in some ways is very current. He is going to look at Hindu nationalism, and he's going to do a conceptual analysis of Vinayak Damodar Savarkar's concept of Hindutva. What he also, what we discussed just a moment ago, is I had asked him that he should also speak a little possibly of developments in the Hindutva groups in 2004, 2009, when in many respects, at least on the political front, Hindutva, the BJP was in somewhat of a disarray, and maybe some of his insight would be very useful in that respect. Now, beyond his work on Hindutva, he is co-author of a political and economic dictionary of South Asia. He also serves as a consultant for the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and as well for the Foreign Office in Germany, where he works in an expert group called the Afghanistan-Pakistan Task Force. Now, without further ado, I'm going to leave it to Dr. Sigrid Wolf to enlighten us on what is a very current and interesting issue in Indian society and politics. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Rates, for your nice words and kind introduction. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a lecturer at the South Asia Institute since now 12 years. And furthermore, I worked for the think tank in Brussels. We set them up 3 years ago. Our mission is to support or promote South Asian teams in the European Parliament. So we had a couple of events there, for example, a lot on Bangladesh in the last 1.5 years. And of course we are looking also for cooperation, and perhaps, but this is a different topic which we can perhaps discuss later over a cup of coffee or tea. Hindu nationalism is a theme which caught my attention since many years. I did my master thesis on Hindu nationalism as a social movement, focusing on the interaction between the different major groups, and particularly this area this time frame which you mentioned was for me interesting, because I was thinking, or the puzzle which was bothering me was how you can set up a social movement in the long run which is able to catch or gain political power, and without getting into typical troubles of movements. But this is a topic which I will introduce you soon. My PhD, because when you're looking at social movements, you have to look what is the major clue of a social movement, what holds the movement together, the radicals and the moderates. And then you come automatically to the issue of identity, which of course in the Hindu nationalism context is Hindutva, and therefore I did my PhD on Hindutva. The title was The Construction of a Collective Identity in India, the case of Hindutva by Savarkar. This is a little bit the background of my work. In the last year I was focusing on other issues, but now this presentation is something like a restart of my work on Hindu nationalism, and the major aim is I want to introduce analytical concept on social movements in the context of Hindu nationalism. So therefore, the theme of my presentations, or the content of my presentation, is first to contextualize Hindu nationalism. I will introduce you to some core question and some of my arguments. Furthermore, and this is the main part, I want to try to conceptualize Hindu nationalism as a social movement, and here I want to introduce or apply a concept about new social movements. We have a whole research group on new social movements in Germany. This research group came up with the appearance of the Green Party in Germany. So this is a long, we've already a couple of years working on that, and they're quite established and doing some interesting work, which is unfortunately not so well known outside Europe, especially not in Asia. And the next point is a core issue. This brings us then, might be interesting then in the context of the decade after 2004. As a typical dilemma of a social movement, and this in the context of Hindu nationalism, just you have always the problems within the movement, the problem with movement and party. There's always tensions, and in particular between radical and the moderate wing. And then, of course, I have to make a little reference to the impact of the India's general election 2014 on the whole movement, what this means for us, what we have to expect. And in this context, of course, I try to give, make a conclusion and an outlook. And generally, I know that you're all specialists on India and on Hindu nationalism, but still we have to somehow contextualize this as a starting point. For me, is the appearance of Hindu nationalism is without doubt, I think, one of the most noteworthy developments in contemporary Indian politics after independence. I think there's also no doubt that when you go through the literature, that Hindu nationalism refers basically to an attempt to transform the state and society in India, especially the statements that Hindu nationalism is a threat to secularism and certain constitutional provisions. Just think about the special status of Kashmir, for example. Hindu nationalism is also getting permanently associated with communalism, means clashes between different religious communities, like Hindu-Muslim conflicts, or also clashes between Hindus and Christians. And therefore, Hindu nationalism is perceived by its critics as the greatest threat towards the Indian model of consensus democracy and the societal fundamental concepts of unity and diversity, and therefore as a major challenge towards cultural pluralism and minority rights. My main arguments in this context is that Hindu nationalism has to be understood as a social movement. Therefore, I have to say, especially in Europe and North America, when you talk about social movement, you have normally, you associate social movements with something positive, you know, a positive connotation, like you associate this women movement, women rights, labor right movements. So something which you see as a thing which is bringing the culture, the society forward. But it's not necessarily always the case. A social movement has not to be a priori a positive thing. So therefore, I would say Hindu nationalism is a social movement, but in general terms, a more untypical one. Hindu nationalism is facing as a typical social movement dilemma, which means that they are torn between the movement and the party, and the radical and the moderate pole. I give always the example, the German example of the Green Party, which developed out of a major movement like peace movement, environmental movement. And out of this movement, this was a very interesting development in the German political party system, that they were able to set a party, which is still quite strong. And and they had this a problem. I mean, the ideology worked perfectly as the Green Party was in opposition, but as soon as they got in power, and this, you know, at this time in Germany, as they had this grand coalition with the Social Democrats, suddenly they were in trouble. Because when a party which is out of the movement in government, they have to accept or deal with political necessities. So it's always difficult to implement radical demands from within the movement. So you have the clash between the movement and the party, and in particular, which I say it's more cross-cultural conflicts between the radical and the moderate wing, which goes through the party and the movement, which is a very interesting, I think, way to compare this with, or to understand what's happening in this Hindu nationalist movement, in the Sangharia. And despite frictions, tension in the past, the ideological foundation, collective identity offers enough flexibility to bridge the radical and the moderate pole. There was a lot of talk that, oh, Hindutva doesn't work, but therefore one has really to go deep into Hindutva, and in particular what Savarkar outlined in all his writings, that there is a lot of flexibility how to interpret Hindutva. But this will be a point for later. And one of the major points for me is that Hindu nationalism is not a threat towards Indian democracy. And fifth, this is more now academic, Heidelberg question in my department. We're always trying, as right the direct line in our teaching and research, it is possible to apply successful Western theoretical concepts to the Indian context or South Asian context. Because there are always the debates, in particular within South Asia, the argument that you can't apply the liberal democracy concept because this was created in the Western context, and this doesn't fit South Asia. But I don't think, I don't agree to that. It's just a matter how you apply the concepts and how on which abstract level. My core questions are: how is the BJP to conciliate the radical and the moderate elements of the party in order to avoid deconstructive factionalism and frictions? Second, in which ways the BJP tries to bridge ideology, culture-orientated demands from within the non-parliamentary wing of the movement with the political necessities of accumulating political power for it. And this leads to us to the core question: how to solve the contradiction between ideology and real politics, or realpolitik. So coming to the core element of my presentation, the contextualization of Hindu nationalism as a social movement. I want to introduce you to a German scholar. His name is Joachim Raschke, who works since decades on social movements. And he offers us a definition, a concept of a social movement, meaning which kind of criteria a social movement have to be fulfilled to be a social movement. Because you have a lot of different other societal phenomena, like a short episode, which means short time breakout of public protest, but this doesn't mean necessarily a social movement. So for him, a social movement is a mobilizing collective agent who pursues the goal of fundamentally transforming, hindering, or reversing society. The agent pursues its goal with a certain degree of continuity, high symbolic integration, and low level of role specification. This leads us to following 8 criteria of a social movement. So when you have to fulfill these 8 criteria to be a social movement. So first, a social movement has to be a mobilizing collective agent. Second, there's a need of a certain degree of continuity. Third, a social movement needs the support of a collective identity. Fourth, there is a high symbolic interpretation within a movement. Fifth, there's a minimum level of organizational structure. Sixth, usually there's a low level of role specification, what is a characteristic of social movements. And seventh, of course, a social movement needs goals. Yeah? It means achieving, preventing, or reverting social change. And of course, each social movement has a start and an ending. What means to be a mobilizing collective agent? First, the agent does not need a special organizational form. Instead, the agent can adopt a multitude of different organizational forms. This means, for example, an agent can be a political party, can be a cultural organization, can be a local grassroots NGO, everything. Important is that mobilization of support is of utmost importance for the survival of a social movement. So a social movement never should stop. So it must constantly moving. I like to refer, for example, to the former DDR, the Monday demonstration. Yeah? When a social movement stopped to be active, yeah, it's dead. This might be very interesting for us when we compare the social movement in the time between 2004 and 2009. A lot of people were saying, oh, well, the BGP is not anymore in government, Hindu nationalism is dead. It's not the case, because it was still active. But this we can discuss later. Therefore, to be permanently active, moving, a social movement needs two requirements. First, the capacity of conflict. It means a movement must be interested that the conflict is always going on, escalating. When there's no conflict, there's no point of the movement. Yeah? There needs a movement. The movement needs a conflict to mobilize their own people. And secondly, it's most important, also important, of course, as a capacity for action. It means a movement needs resources, the control of the resources and available resources. The resources can be, of course, financial resources, human resources, access to internet is getting more and more important. But I will also talk a little bit later about that. Hindu nationalists, and then here, when we come directly to the case, Hindu nationalists carried by a widespread network consisting of various organizations, as we all know, the Sangh Parivar. The term Sangh Parivar refers to an alliance of parliamentary and extra-parliamentary organizations which oblige themselves to the Hindutva concept, which is identified or perceived as their core ideology and identity. But important is to realize that the Hindu nationalism is not a monolithic bloc, and Hindu national organization differs substantially regarding structure, behavioral patterns, type of membership. Also, we have all here like full-time workers, part-time activists. The different organizations have variation in terms of aims and, most important, the sphere of action. But one thing is, they have all in common that the overall aim is of the Sangh Parivar is to be able to influence all segments and dimensions of state and society in India. In the center of the Sangh Parivar stands the work-sharing triumvirate. First of most important is the Rastriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the National Volunteer Organization, RSS. It's a cultural organization which functions as an organization ideological backbone. And Vishnu Hindu Parishad, the World Council of the World Hindu Council, the VHT, which tries to cover all kinds of Hindu religious matters and attempts to function as an umbrella organization of the numerous streams and sects among Hinduism. And the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is supposed to represent the Hindu national movement in the political parliamentary sphere. I like to emphasize it's supposed to represent. Of course, as I mentioned, the Hindu nationalism, the social movement needs some kind of continuity. Social movements are attempts over a certain period of time to achieve, hinder, or reverse social change through protest. Only when there's a certain degree of continuity one can speak of a social movement. And the length of the requested continuity movement lifespan depends on the goals. Actually, there is no fixed definition or agreement in the literature. Some people talk about decade or some people 3 years, but I don't think this is such an important thing. But at least the movement should be around about a couple of years. Yeah? And Hindu nationalism is not a new product of independent India. Its ideological roots can be traced far back in the Indian colonial history. The British Raj and finds its origin in the exponents of Hindu revolution like Arya Samaj or Brahmo Samaj. So, and of course, the core organization, the RSS, VHP, BGP, Bharatiya Janata Sangh and the BGP have been there since decades around, so we can easily say there's a degree of continuity which justify that we can say that the social St. Paribas is a social movement. And then for me, the most interesting part, the most interesting element of social movements is the collective identity. Social movements need support through collective identity. A functioning collective identity is the ultimate source which helps to manifest and reach political goals. Collective identity is identified as an essential constituent in generating consensus among individuals and networks of collective actors. As a basis for consensus within a movement, collective identity must fulfill the function of providing the stability, consolidation, and success of the social movement in the process of political mobilization. So without a collective identity which is functioning, which holds the movement together, the movement can't exist. So in the case of the Hindu nationalist movement, I think there's no doubt about it that Hindutva is a collective identity ideology. The Hindu national movement is equipped with an ideology foundation, Hindutva, to provide the numerous movement organizations and the members with a collective identity. And Hindutva constitutes the mandate core of Hindu nationalism, and it's not a clear, from my perspective, it's not a clear, determined single concept, but a fluid system of different sorts, ideas, notion of identity and citizenship, which have emerged over time and space. This is for me, so my interpretation of Hindutva, to see this as not a fixed thing. Yeah? It's permanently changing. Yeah? But this, I would like to talk later about in detail about this. And this is most important to understand how Vajpayee managed to hold the movement together, and this will be also the challenge then for Prime Minister Modi. Most coherent and influential formulation of Hindutva was provided by Vinayak Damodar Savarkar in the early 1920s. This is also for me one of the main arguments that we have to look at Savarkar to understand Hindutva. And Savarkar's core question was how one can build an Indian nation which is strong enough to ensure its independence, Swaraj or self-rule, in the international competition of nations. This is really the core line of him. And he saw the major problem of India as an inherent heterogeneity of Hinduism as a social, cultural, and religious system of the majority. That was Savarkar's notion. And he identified a certain lack of common accepted norms of identity, which leads permanently to a disintegration of the Hindu people and leads also to a lack of loyalty. And this was, in Savarkar's notion, the main issue that India was in the past, ancient India was never ever able to create a substantial state building. You know, and it was always weaken India, and make it vulnerable for foreign invasions regarding Savarkar. Savarkar's conclusion was, okay, one has to build up a Hindu Sangathan, a cohesive Hindu community, and therefore one has to create a homogeneity, more homogeneity among the Hindu community, which is subsequently leads him to this idea that one has to eliminate heterogeneous elements. And most important for him is, and this opens the floor for an inclusive dimension of Hindutva, that he believed in numbers. Yeah? The stronger the Hindu community is, the better. This means that one has to include as much as possible people, for example, untouchables, including Sikhs, Jains, Buddhists. And this was for him, he called this whole process Hindu Rashtra as the way of nation building. And therefore it's most important for him that one has to include all dimensions. So Hindutva is not only focusing on one issue. For him was important to have social dimension, economic dimension, and as well of course political dimension. This means, for example, in the social dimension that Savarkar, and you can also, when you hear current statements, it's like a red line in the Hindu nationalist movement that one has to focus on the reformation of the social systems, the caste system. So he was totally against the idea of the caste system based on birth. So he was more interested on creating a society which is based on merits. And of course, one of his strong elements was, but one has to understand that Savarkar was a lawyer, so he didn't have so much knowledge on economic issues, but still he was permanently emphasizing that India has to build up a strong economy. And in political dimension, of course, a major issue, which is also most critical issue, was his the definition of citizenship, who is a Hindu. And these 3 points are the main pillars of collective identity construction. Important for a social movement is that you have symbols. So collective identity must be understood as a strong common bond between at least 2 people, which are based on 3 requirements. First, a subjective sense of unity and the fiction of similarities, which allows a dissociation of the own reference group towards others. Yeah? We or the others. We have this always in all collective identity construction, that you find attempts to create boundaries. And second, you have forms of communization. This is a German term of Vergemeinschaftung, is difficult to translate, which must be reinforced by persistent interaction and organization. And the third pillar is all forms of communization must be mediated symbolically, internally and externally. Therefore, the Hindu national movement is really an outstanding example. So this symbolic integration requires required symbolic integration can comprise of immaterial and material goods, certain practices, rituals, value patterns, fashion, clothing, way of behaving, language, habitus, and concrete symbols, among many other things. In order to enhance the feelings of belonging and strengthening the collective identities, the Hindu nationalist movement uses numerous instruments. For example, it's just a first compilation, and there are of course much more. But this I was just picking up. For example, the saffron flag is one of the most important symbols. Or, of course, the color, the saffron color. Then the use of the symbols of Om and swastika. And, of course, we all know the pictures. I have some at the next slides. One of the next slides. The clothing, the khaki shirt, the white shirt, lati as a distinctive dress, or the hat of the RSS. And of course, the celebration of common festivals, for example, the RSS are focusing on the Founders' Day, the Hindu New Year's, and appreciation of Shivaji, in particular Maharashtra. This is how the Hindu nationalist movement tried to mobilize the people and bring the symbols into action that to create this common bond between their members and sympathizers. Or, for example, another issue is the promotion of Sanskrit as national symbol, or the promotion of Hindu as national language. I had an interesting situation in Mumbai. I did some interviews there, for example. It was in Dadar, and I asked for a way to the Savarkar Memorial, and I met one of this person there and asked him, "Oh, can you please help me to put this in this way?" And his answer was, "Wait, I'm a proud Hindu. You have to speak in Hindi with me." So this is also, and he was obviously one of the Shiv Sena persons. And so this is how they really get into that, and how to create this feeling of belonging. And common rituals with focus on discipline and to uphold Hindu culture. It's of course one of the major issues. How to celebrate common rituals? I was just picking up one thing, and I think this is one of the most impressive example how the Hindu national movement, as in particular, tried to practice their symbols and rituals is in the way of the shakas. The shakas, as many of you know, are small localized units at the grassroots levels, and as the main building blocks of the RSS, undertaking persistent mobilization and recruitment for the Hindu nationalist movement. And here the members get physical exercise, marching, the lati training, and ideological discussions. and there's also a place where they practice their common rituals. And here I have some pictures which really, you can see here all this, here the use of saffron flags, the swastika, and the marching. So they're really into, have a strong sense of using their the symbols and how they create this common bounds with a common training. Okay, here all the flags marching. I use this picture to show how interlinked they are, BGP and RSS. I think, and you can see that all this, important is to see that all the different organizations using the same color, same symbols, and this is a way how the Hindu nationalist movement tried to create the common bound. So, and most important is that the social movement has a minimum structure, organization structure. For example, social movements possess a minimum level of organization structure which grants the movement consistency and a specific management structure which allows strategic action. Which means if you don't have any minimum structure, the social movement will more or less, they will not have no chance to survive. And as created a broadly diversified network in this context of different sub and coordinated organizations. Besides VHP, BGP, I don't have a clear number at the moment, but some people talk about 40, 50 associate organizations. Some other sources claim 150, depends. But what is more interesting is, instead of the numbers, is a different kind of organizations they have, like student and youth organization, including women wings, own various newspapers, run labor unions, they have various schools and hospitals, NGOs, for example, conduct relief operation, or in the northeast to work towards the conversion of Christians. So all different kind of organization to, I would say, penetrate all sections of the society. I just added one figure which I found in the web. So all the different here is, of course, the RSS here is portrayed as a flagship, as a mother organization, and of course the most important organization at the BGP as a parliamentarian wing, and the VHP as here one of the most important non-parliamentary organizations, all the different kinds of affiliated groups, which gives you also impression how strong they are. Usually, social movements have a low level of role specification. Social movements are characterized by a limited level of this role specification. But what one has also to say is that higher level of role specification is possible. Yeah, it's important to understand it. But the role differentiation is a distinct expression of labor division and power processes. That several forms of participation are there, like elites, activists, sympathizers. You have this in all, for example, I mentioned the Green Party in the movement. You have all different kinds of things. You also can see this in the Hindu nationalist movement. You have this part-time, I say part-time Hindu nationalists who just get active after working or on the weekend. A movement can contain several different organizations which have a higher degree of organization specification, like the RSS, of course. This is full-time workers. But important is to understand that despite personal and ideological linkages within the Sangha, RSS, BGP, and affiliates are acting largely independent, having their own agenda and preamble, structure, and strategies, which, of course, it's a very important point for later, that there is a lot of conflicts involved. But within the Sangha, the RSS function as a kind of mother organization and cadre hotbed, which sees itself as a core of the entire movement organization structure, the top political decision maker, and the ideologically pace setter. It's also important to be aware of that. And the SS in this context use a kind, I call this strategy of appropriation, and which means that the SS provide the affiliates with human resources like the so-called well-known double memberships, which is used by the SS to ensure the influence. Of course, they provide also financial resources and logistic infrastructural resources. And therefore, of course, affiliates have to implement the SS goals and respect SS guidance. The goals of the Hindu national movements are, first in general, social movements aim at changing social and political circumstances that are deemed as a burden, unacceptable or unfair by large groups in society. And the goals of a social movement comprise changing state and society, but not necessarily to achieve a coup d'etat or regime change or revolution, rather to change certain relevant structures. This is a main characteristic of many social movements. And the change of structure can happen either in a radical form or a reformist form. This radical reformist process included the abolition of political and economical power structures, institutions, replacing elites, of the transformation of social and cultural norms and values. Coming back to the social movement, to the Hindu national movement, the SS vision is to curb the fragmentation of the Hindu society and to establish a Hindu state, so-called Hindu Rashtra, and the enhancement of the morality, discipline, and character of the Hindus, build up a new Hindu elite based on Hindutva ideology to represent Hindu interests. And there's a conviction by the SS or SS cutters that if SS cutters are put in place a key position of state and society, secular India can be transformed into a Hindu state. Some sources are claiming that when the SS are able to somehow educate or indoctrinate Hindu people, they're able to change the state. This at least which some sources are claiming. BHP goals are confronting and or counterbalancing the institutionalized monotheistic religions of Islam and Christianity with a new organization capable of providing cohesion and unity of the Hindu community perceived as disparate. Second, promoting the idea of unity within the Hindu community, the so-called Ekatmata. And third, influencing the broader mass, especially the Dalits, untouchables, and the tribal communities. And regarding the BJP, of course, as a political party, I was focusing here more now on the latest manifesto. The India First campaign was actually one of the most goals. So this means the sole focus must be the promotion of India's national interests. And here they brought up two concepts, which was quite in the press. Concept of brand India, which means transform India into a global power. Here they are focused on the so-called 5 T's, talent, trade, tradition, tourism, and technology. This was flanked by the concept of Rainbow of India, make India into a developed nation. And here the focus, especially the focus areas were India culture, agriculture, women, natural resources, youth, power, democracy, and knowledge. So far as a manifesto was telling us. But the overall aim of the Sangpario was achieving the capacities to influence all segments and dimensions of state and society in India through a division of labor and subsequent different agendas as well as strategies. Of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, all social movements have an end. So there are different kind of endings. Of course, most important is when the social movement achieves their goals. Yeah? But when we come to the whole Hindu nationalism movement, of course, India is at the moment not a theocratic state, Hindu theocratic state, as you know, nor a global power yet, but might be on a good way. But this we have to see in the next years. So there, the goals are not achieved yet. And second, when the movement is shattered by state repression, this is what happened at least 2 times with the RSS. Yeah, they were 2 times banned in India, and the BJP had to suffer tremendously from electoral defeats. But my argument is that the movement is today stronger than ever before. Or my observation. When the movement, the third issue is when the movement team loses public interest or presence leading to a lack of mobilization capacities. Here we can say that that the Hindu nationalist movement were quite flexible in changing their agenda, in particular the BJP. First one was the tremendous influence of change of Vajpayee to try to get more in the moderate mainstream, and you can see this also now with Prime Minister Modi, that he doesn't talk so much about radical demands from within the movement and focusing more on policy, economic policy. And then when a movement is not able to bridge the moderate with the radical pole, and here this brings us to the next point of my presentation, this classical movement dilemma. The classical movement dilemma means, so for example, in the Indian Hindu national context, is Indian electorate reacted sharply to Hindu national Muslim confrontation. Here most important, of course, is Ayodhya 92 and Gujarat 2002, the massive riots caused by radical elements of the Hindu national movements leading to electoral defeats in the 2004 and 2009 election. Of course, there were other reasons too, but this was a major issue. This created the awareness among the moderate section of the Hindu nationalist movement that you have no chance to gain political capital through attacking religious minorities and radical political demands. And this was what I mentioned, a process which started with Mr. Vajpayee. There was a substantial reassessment of campaign strategies and political demands based on radical ideology. I call this something like the moderate swing. This means not that the Hindu nationalism as a whole is now a moderate movement. That's of course not. But you can see how it's a quite cunning strategy. In certain situations, this come back, some radical demands, but we can talk later about it when you have a look on the campaign strategies and statements of Modi. And radical demands from Hindu national hardliner got largely ignored in the last years. There was this term of frozen issues, like, for example, Kashmir or the Ayodhya issue. And instead, main focus on the build-up of economy and security capacities. For example, there was a talk of the Hindu bomb and also now the build-up of defense capacities as some kind of alternative area for the radicals. Nevertheless, there's a growing frustration within the non-parliamentary wing, especially the VHP, including large segments of the RSS, foremost on the grassroots level. There I had also a quite interesting interview with this former international president of the VHP, Mr. Dalmia. He told me directly, as I asked him, do you think the VHP is a party of Hindu interest? And he told me straight away, no. The BJP is not a party who represents Hindu interests. This was 2004. No, 2001, sorry. 2001. And tensions between the radical and moderate pole about political implementation of Hindu ideology. This leads to numerous struggles over BJP leadership and agenda setting, most important here also the last years in this direction. Persistent attempts appear to keep the BJPs in line with Hindutva. But there's BJP awareness that success depends largely on the support of the extra-parliamentary wing, including the radical elements. The BJP knows that on one side they want to get the independence, but on the other side, when it comes to electoral campaigns, they need the grassroots organization. In particular, the millions of the workers of the RSS function really as a boost when it comes to campaigning. Subsequently, there's a need for some kind of BJP rapprochement towards the radicals. And subsequently, the BJP must offer some kind of political room space for the radicals. Yeah? This we have to also expect. We had this under Vajpayee, during Vajpayee government, but also we will have this in the next years under Prime Minister Modi. Okay. I'm soon done. Now a little reference to the India general elections. Basically, BJP suffered several years from factionalism, but did not determine an existential threat, neither to the BJP unity nor the cohesiveness of the whole Hindu nationalist movement. In this direction, the 2014 election marks a strengthening of Hindu nationalism in the parliamentary sphere, there's no doubt. But it should be not interpreted as a return. It shows just the resilience of the Hindu nationalist movement. Much depends now on Prime Minister Modi's ability to manage the balancing act of harmonizing visions with ideology and everyday politics. But we have also to see that the extra-parliamentary wing, like has got a boost in new members. There are permanently now reports on how the local shakas get more and more new members and are permanently extending. And there's a kind of increase of conflicts between Hindu and Muslims. There are more and more reports that there are more clashes, but this we have to see how it goes over the next years. This we have to follow. My conclusion is the most significant elements of the Hindu national movement accepted democratic norms and procedures. Hindu nationalism contribute to the resilience of India's democracy. Doesn't care if they want to or not, but at the end they did it. The basic idea is behind this that they were able to establish a second party on the national level. They helped to introduce and consolidate coalition politics on the national level. The Hindu national movement might perhaps also help to reduce the role of dynastic rule in India. And finally, of course, from my perspective, is that we can apply Western theoretical concepts in the Indian context. So what we should expect, there will be definitely a granting of certain reserved domains for Hindu national radicals. I think their field will be like, particularly in the area of culture and education policies. We will have a strong personality cult focusing on Prime Minister Modi. We will have a centralization of power in the Prime Minister office, which already lead to reduction of the influence of minister and cabinet. There's a likelihood of a weakening of the roles of the regions. We will see an economic-driven policy on the expense of domestic political issues. And subsequently also strong focus on foreign policy by the central government. We have also an increasing pressure by radicals regarding domestic issues. See, perhaps one issue we find some statements regarding the Naxalites, that the Hindu nationalists, in particular the ASS, are demanding a strong stand against them. But what we will not see is a fundamental change in state and society, and there will be no theocratic Hindu state. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wolf, for connecting some of key developments that are occurring in India with this conceptual construct which you have developed and built up from Joachim Raschke's work. I'm hoping for some questions in this regard, so it's open to the audience for questions.